Imagine the shock of discovering hidden feelings, especially when they involve someone you least expect. Get ready for a heart-wrenching tale of forbidden attraction and unexpected desires as we delve into this true story that will leave you breathless. This is the story of John, a father who thought he was living a normal, quiet life. Until one Saturday afternoon when his son's best friend, Sebastian, came to visit. That day when my son Daniel's friend Sebastian visited our house was one of the craziest yet most exciting days of my life. It all started on a normal Saturday afternoon as the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow through the windows of my living room. John leaned against the kitchen counter, nursing a glass of water while the soft hum of the evening news played in the background. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My son Daniel was away on a camping trip with his college friends, leaving the house feeling unusually still. Then the doorbell rang. John wasn't expecting anyone. Setting his glass down, John moved to the door, opening it to find Sebastian, Daniel's best friend, standing there. His dark eyes held a flicker of hesitation, his posture almost apologetic as he greeted John. "Hey, Mr. Johnson," he said with a sheepish smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you. Daniel told me to stop by if I needed to borrow anything for the trip, but I didn't realize he'd already left." Sebastian had been Daniel's friend for years. John had seen him grow from an awkward teenager into a confident, athletic young man. There was always something about Sebastian, a quiet maturity that stood out, the way he carried himself, a warmth in his smile that put people at ease. He had always been polite, thoughtful, the kind of friend any parent would want for their child. "It's no bother," John said, stepping aside to let him in. "What do you need?" He shifted his weight, looking almost embarrassed. "Actually, I forgot my sleeping bag at home. I thought Daniel might have a spare." John chuckled, shaking his head. "He probably does. Let me check the garage." John gestured for him to follow him, and as they made their way to the garage, John couldn't help but notice how much he had changed since the last time John had seen him. He was taller now, broader. His shirt clung to his frame in a way that made it clear he'd been hitting the gym regularly. John felt a strange pang of awareness, one John immediately pushed aside. In the garage, John rummaged through a stack of camping gear until John found the spare sleeping bag. John handed it to him, brushing off the dust. "Here you go," John said. "Daniel won't mind." "Thanks, Mr. Johnson," he said, his smile genuine. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Do you mind if I hang out for a bit? My ride's not coming for another hour, and I don't want to just sit in the car." "Of course," John said. "Come on in." They ended up in the kitchen where John brewed a pot of coffee. Sebastian leaned against the counter, his arms crossed as they chatted about his classes, his plans for the summer, and the camping trip. He had always been easy to talk to, thoughtful and articulate in a way that made conversations with him feel natural. But as the minutes passed, John began to notice something different. The way his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary when their eyes met. The way he shifted closer as he leaned against the counter, his presence filling the space between them. John tried to ignore it, chalking it up to John's imagination, but when he reached out to grab his mug, his fingers brushed against John's, and the warmth of his touch sent a jolt through John. "Sorry," he said, pulling his hand back quickly. "It's fine," John said, forcing a chuckle. "I'm just clumsy." But the tension in the room was palpable now, the air between them thick with something unspoken. John busied himself with the coffee, trying to shake the strange feeling that had settled in John's chest. This was Sebastian, Daniel's best friend. Whatever John thought John was feeling, it wasn't real, it couldn't be. "Mr. Johnson," he said after a long pause, his voice softer now. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," John said, turning to face him. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting John's. "Have you ever felt like you wanted something you knew you shouldn't?" The question caught John off guard, and John felt John's pulse quicken. "That's a pretty heavy question," John said. Try to keep his tone light. He gave a small, self-conscious laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, sorry, I guess I've just been thinking about it a lot lately." There was something in his tone, an honesty, a vulnerability that made John's chest tighten. John wanted to ask him what he meant, to understand what was going on in his mind. But John wasn't sure John was ready to hear the answer. "Sometimes we want things that aren't good for us," John said carefully. "It's human nature, but that doesn't mean we have to act on them." He nodded, his gaze distant. "Yeah, I guess you're right." But the way he looked at John after he said it, the flicker of something in his eyes, the way his lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say more, it left John unsettled. John turned back to the coffee pot, hoping the act of pouring them both another cup would give John something to focus on. But John couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, and John wasn't sure if it was something John could ignore. The coffee sat on the counter between them as the conversation grew sparse. John could feel Sebastian's presence like a heavy weight, and every subtle movement he made seemed magnified in the silence. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't normal either. It was charged, like something unsaid was hanging in the air, waiting to break. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, stretching slightly, and John caught himself glancing at him out of the corner of John's eye. His shirt lifted just enough to reveal a strip of taut, tan skin, and John immediately looked away, John's face warming. "This is ridiculous," John thought. "Get a grip." So John said, breaking the silence, "Are you excited about the camping trip?" He shrugged, his lips curving into a small smile. "Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's more for Daniel, really. He loves that kind of stuff. I'm just there for the company." His words made John smile. "That sounds like you," John said, always looking out for him. "You've been a great friend to Daniel over the years." Sebastian looked down, his fingers toying with the edge of his mug. "He's been a good friend to me too," he said quietly. Then after a pause, he added, "You've been good to me too." There was again that softness in his tone, the unspoken layers behind his words. John's chest tightened as John searched his face for some clue about what he was trying to say, but he didn't meet John's gaze. "I just mean," he continued, "you've always made me feel welcome, like part of the family. That's not something I take for granted." John nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Well, you are part of the family, Sebastian. At least that's how John see it." He smiled at that, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mr. Johnson," he said, then almost as an afterthought, he added, "You can call me Sebastian, you know. The Mr. Johnson thing feels too formal." John chuckled. "All right, Sebastian, but only if you stop calling me Mr. Johnson." "Deal, deal," he said, his grin widening just enough to ease some of the tension in the room. They moved into the living room after that, settling onto the couch. The sun had set, and the soft glow of the table lamp cast warm shadows across the room. Sebastian sat at the far end of the couch, his posture relaxed but his eyes focused on John. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a long stretch of silence. "Of course," John replied, bracing himself for another loaded question. "Have you ever felt like there was something you couldn't say out loud, even though you really wanted to?" John frowned, caught off guard by the question. "I think everyone feels that way at some point," John said carefully, "but sometimes saying it out loud is the only way to move forward." Sebastian nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Yeah," he said softly, "but what if saying it changes everything?" His words sent a chill down John's spine, though John couldn't say why. John shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of how close they were, even with the space between them. "Sometimes change is a good thing," John said, trying to keep his tone steady, even if it's scary at first. He looked up then, his eyes locking onto John's. What if it's not? The weight of his gaze was almost too much, and John found himself looking away, unsure of how to navigate the sudden shift in their conversation. "I guess it depends on what you're afraid of." Sebastian didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of ruining this, of ruining what we have." The vulnerability in his voice caught John off guard, and John felt John's heart clench. "Sebastian, never mind," he said quickly, cutting him off. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "I should probably go. My ride's probably close by now." John stood too, instinctively reaching out to stop him. John's hand closed around his arm, and he froze, his eyes wide as he looked down at where they touched. "You don't have to go," John said, John's voice soft. Not if you don't want to. Sebastian's gaze lifted to meet John's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy, electric, like the moment before a storm. Then he took a step closer, closing the distance between them. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, his voice trembling. I just know I don't want to leave. His words hit John like a punch to the gut, and John felt a surge of emotions John couldn't name. Fear, confusion, longing. They all swirled together, leaving John breathless. Sebastian, John said, John's voice barely audible. We can't. I know, he whispered, but I can't help it. He reached out then, his hand brushing against John's, and John felt a spark, an undeniable pull that left John frozen in place. John wanted to step back, to put some distance between them, but John couldn't. Instead, John found himself leaning into the moment, John's heart pounding in John's chest. And then it happened. His lips brushed against John's, soft, tentative, like he was testing the waters. John's mind screamed at John to pull away, but John's body betrayed John, frozen in place as the kiss deepened. The kiss lingered, hanging heavy in the air between them. The world outside seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the dimly lit living room. Sebastian's breath was shallow, his hand hovering near John's, as if he was unsure whether to pull away or come closer. John started, but the words caught in John's throat. He stepped back abruptly, running a hand through his hair. I'm so sorry, he blurted, his voice shaky. I didn't mean to. I don't know what I was thinking. John's chest felt tight, John's heart pounding against John's ribs as John searched for something to say. Sebastian, it's okay, John managed, though John wasn't sure if John meant it. Nothing about this felt okay, and yet John couldn't deny the way John's body had responded, the way John had leaned into the kiss, however briefly. He turned away, pacing across the room. No, it's not okay. I shouldn't have. God, Daniel would kill me if he knew. At the mention of John's son, a cold wave of reality washed over John. This was wrong, so wrong, and yet the tension between them remained undeniable and unrelenting. Sebastian, John said gently, trying to steady John's voice. We need to talk about this. He stopped pacing, his shoulders tense as he turned to face John. What is there to talk about? I crossed the line. I messed up. I'm sorry. John took a step closer, John's hands trembling at John's sides. It's not just you, John admitted, the words tasting foreign in John's mouth. I felt it too. His eyes widened, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with something unspoken. Then he shook his head, his expression conflicted. We can't, he said firmly. You're Daniel's dad. I'm his best friend. This whatever this is, it's not supposed to happen. I know, John said, John's voice barely above a whisper, but it already has. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sebastian sat down on the couch, burying his face in his hands. John wanted to say something, anything that might make this easier, but the truth was John didn't know how to navigate this either. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up at John, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and longing. What do we do now? John sat down beside him, careful to leave some space between them. I don't know, John admitted, but we need to figure it out. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. I don't want to lose this, he said softly, not just, whatever this is, but your friendship, your trust. I don't want to ruin everything. His words hit John hard, and John felt a pang of guilt for putting him in this position. Sebastian had always been like family, someone John could rely on and trust, and yet here they were, standing on the edge of something that could destroy all of that. You're not going to lose me, John said, placing a hand on his shoulder. No matter what happens, we'll figure this out. He leaned into John's touch, his body relaxing slightly under John's hand. You mean that? He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. I mean it, John said firmly, but we have to be careful. This isn't just about us, it's about Daniel too. At the mention of John's son, Sebastian nodded, his expression somber. You're right, he said. We can't let him find out. It would destroy him. The weight of that truth settled over them. a reminder of just how precarious their situation was. But even as they sat there wrapped in silence, John couldn't ignore the way John's hand lingered on his shoulder, or the way his body seemed to lean into John's. Hours passed, and the tension between them didn't ease. They talked in circles, trying to make sense of what had happened and what it meant, but no matter how hard they tried to rationalize it, the pull between them remained undeniable and unrelenting. Sebastian apparently did not have to leave anymore, and they talked for hours. Sometimes they touched, but they both didn't want to, but still there was a certain tension between them for the whole night, a tension that told John there was more coming and that John wanted more, and so did he. As the clock ticked past midnight, Sebastian stood, his movements hesitant. "I should go," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. John stood too, following him to the door. "Take care of yourself," John said, John's chest tightening as he reached for the handle. He paused, turning to look at John one last time. "You too," he said, his eyes searching John's, "and thank you for not hating me." John managed a small smile. "There's nothing to hate, Sebastian. Just, be careful, okay?" He nodded, his gaze lingering on John's for a moment before he stepped out into the night. As the door closed behind him, John leaned against it, John's mind racing with everything that had happened and everything that might still happen, because deep down John knew for a fact that this wasn't over yet. The way he looked John in the eyes, the way they kissed, the way they touched each other told John was not done with him. He had evoked something in John had never felt before. Such a young and handsome guy. I'm sure every gay man would want to do certain things with him, and John felt he was open to it. So that left John thinking how John could make this work. The days following Sebastian's visit were a blur of emotions John couldn't untangle. John went through the routine of work, errands, the occasional phone call from Daniel. But John's thoughts were consumed by that night. By him, Sebastian. John told himself it would pass, that this was just a fleeting moment of weakness. But every time John closed his eyes, John saw his face, heard his voice, felt the warmth of his hand lingering against John's. The weight of it all was suffocating, and yet John couldn't bring himself to let go. It was late on a Thursday when the knock came at the door. John wasn't expecting anyone, and Daniel was still out of town. John's heart jumped at the sound, a mix of anxiety and hope rushing through John. When John opened the door, there he was, Sebastian. "I shouldn't be here," he said before John could say anything, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. "I know I shouldn't, but I couldn't stay away." The sight of him standing there, his expression a mix of vulnerability and determination, left John speechless. John stepped aside wordlessly, inviting him in. He hesitated for a moment before crossing the threshold, his presence filling the space in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said as he stood in the entryway, his gaze fixed on the floor. "And I can't stop. I can't stop thinking about you." His words hit John like a punch to the chest, and John felt the air leave John's lungs. "Sebastian, we talked about this. It's complicated." "I know," he said quickly, his voice trembling. "I know it's complicated, and I know it's wrong, but that doesn't change how I feel. I don't know how to make it stop." John wanted to tell him that he wasn't alone, that John had been feeling the same way, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, John reached out, John's hand brushing against his arm. He flinched at the touch, but he didn't pull away. "Sebastian," John said softly, John's voice barely above a whisper, "we can't keep doing this." "I know," he repeated, his gaze finally lifting to meet John's. "But it's not that easy, is it? If it were, I wouldn't be here." His honesty left John raw, stripped of any defenses John might have tried to put up. John stepped closer, John's hand still on his arm. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," John said firmly, though John wasn't sure John believed it himself. "But this, whatever this is, it can't go any further." His shoulders slumped, and John saw the weight of John's words settle over him. "I don't know if I can stop feeling this way," he said quietly. Neither could John, but John didn't say it. They ended up in the living room again. sitting on opposite ends of the couch like they had the last time. The space between them felt like a chasm, impossible to bridge without falling into the same mistakes. "I've known you for so long," Sebastian said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You've always been this constant in my life, someone I could trust, someone who cared, and somewhere along the way, that turned into this." John swallowed hard, John's chest tightening at his words. "I care about you too, Sebastian, but this is dangerous. It could ruin everything." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I know. I don't want to ruin anything, but I also don't want to pretend like this doesn't exist." The room felt unbearably quiet, the weight of their unspoken feelings pressing down on them. John wanted to say something, to find the right words to make this easier, but nothing came. "I should go," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "Sebastian, no, yo no interrupted." Standing abruptly, "I can't stay here, not if it means feeling like this and not being able to do anything about it." John stood too, John's heart racing as he turned to leave. "Wait," John said, John's voice sharper than John intended. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. "What?" "I don't want you to go," John said, the words tumbling out before John could stop them. "I don't know what to do about this either, but I don't want you to leave." He turned slowly, his eyes wide with surprise. "You mean that?" John nodded, John's throat tight. "Yeah, I do." The tension in the room shifted, the air between them crackling with unspoken possibilities. He took a hesitant step toward John, his eyes searching John's for permission, for reassurance. "I don't want to make things harder," he said softly, "but being here, being around you, it's even when I know it shouldn't." John's resolve crumbled at his words, and before John could stop himself, John closed the distance between them. John's hand found his, and he laced his fingers through John's, his touch both tentative and certain. "We're playing with fire," John said, John's voice barely audible. "Maybe," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "but it doesn't feel wrong. Not to me." The hours that followed were a blur of whispered confessions and stolen moments. They didn't cross any lines. Not really. Not yet, but the connection between them deepened, growing into something that felt impossible to ignore. As dawn broke, casting a soft light over the living room, they sat together on the couch, his head resting against John's shoulder. Neither of them spoke, but the silence felt comfortable, like a truce. John knew this wasn't sustainable, that they couldn't keep walking this line without it breaking, but for now, at this moment, John let himself lean into it, knowing that the real world would come crashing in soon enough. After a long moment of silence, Sebastian said, "Mr. Johnson, I'm going to be honest with you. I really like you, and I don't want to hide it anymore. I'm still not sure how you feel about it, but I really need to get this off my chest." And in that moment, the tension changed immediately. John felt a moment of excitement go through John. Sebastian had put himself in such a vulnerable position and had confessed his feelings. John said, "Sebastian, I am so happy you're finally telling me this now. I have been feeling the same, and you attract me a lot. You're such a smart, handsome, and good-looking young man that it really excites me." But John got interrupted. He grabbed John and kissed John, this time a lot deeper, more sensitive, and John felt this was a relief for both of them. The kiss deepened, and after a minute of heavy kissing, he grabbed John on places John loved to be touched by him. John let it all happen. The age difference did not matter. This was pure love now. With his shirt now on the ground, John could finally enjoy his muscular upper body. At one moment, he stopped kissing John and went down. He did the thing, and even though John won't go into detail, John can tell you it was amazing. His lips were so masculine yet so soft that it drove John crazy. It went from bad to worse, and they did everything you can imagine. After they both finished, they lay there in each other's arms. It did not take long before Sebastian fell asleep. He must have been exhausted. A moment later, John dozed off too. A couple of hours later, as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows through the living room, the weight of what they'd shared settled over them. Sebastian shifted slightly, his head still resting on John's shoulder. For a moment, John allowed himself to revel in the warmth of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing. the way his hand lightly brushed John's. It was quiet, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with the implications of what they'd done. Eventually, Sebastian stirred, lifting his head and rubbing his eyes. "I should go," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Before Daniel comes back." John nodded, knowing he was right, but feeling the ache of the impending distance between them. "Yeah, that's probably best." He stood and stretched, the light catching his face in a way that made John's chest tighten. There was a vulnerability in his expression, a mixture of guilt and longing that mirrored John's own. He hesitated as if he wanted to say something, but instead, he just gave John a small, sad smile. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not pushing me away." John stood too, running a hand through his hair as John tried to find the right words. "Sebastian, it's complicated. I don't know where we go from here, but I know I don't want to lose you. I care about you more than I probably should, but this can't be something we ignore, not anymore." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know. I feel the same way." The air between them was charged, every unsaid word hanging in the space. Finally, he stepped toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "I'll call you," he said, glancing back at John. "Okay," John said, John's voice barely above a whisper. "Take care of yourself." "You too," he replied before slipping out into the morning light. The days that followed were excruciating. Sebastian's absence was palpable, leaving a void John hadn't anticipated. Daniel returned home oblivious to the tension brewing beneath the surface. John did John's best to act normal, to bury the emotions that threatened to bubble over every time John thought about Sebastian, but it wasn't easy. Every time John's phone buzzed, John's heart leapt, hoping it was him, but he didn't call, and the silence between them grew heavier with each passing day. A week later, Sebastian showed up at John's door again. This time there was no pretense, no excuses. He stood on the porch, his hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes meeting John's with a determination that stole John's breath. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "I tried, but I couldn't." John stepped aside, letting him in without a word. He moved past John, his presence filling the space as if he'd never left. They stood in the hallway, the weight of their unspoken feelings pressing down on them. "I thought about everything," he said, turning to face John. "About you, about us, about Daniel. And I know it's messy and complicated, but I also know I can't pretend like I don't feel this way, not anymore." His words broke something open in John, and John felt a rush of emotions John couldn't contain. "Sebastian, John started, but he cut John off. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed to tell you, to be honest with you. I don't want to hide this anymore, even if it means walking away." The thought of him walking away was unbearable, and before John could stop himself, John closed the distance between them. John's hands found his face, and John pulled him into a kiss that was both desperate and tender. He responded immediately, his arms wrapping around John, as if he were afraid John might disappear. They broke apart, both of them breathing heavily, their foreheads pressed together. "I don't know where this goes," John admitted, John's voice trembling, "but I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he said, his voice firm. "We'll figure it out together." And the months that followed were a delicate balancing act. Sebastian and John navigated their feelings carefully, keeping their connection hidden from Daniel and the world. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of questioning whether they were doing the right thing. But through it all, they clung to each other, finding solace in the bond they had forged. They knew it couldn't last forever, that the truth would come out eventually, but for now, they allowed themselves to exist in the in-between, savoring the stolen moments and quiet confessions that made up their new reality. And as John looked at Sebastian, his smile lighting up the room, John knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, because some connections are too powerful to ignore, too deep to deny. And this, whatever this was worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to this emotional story. If you were moved by John and Sebastian's unexpected connection, Please give this video a like and subscribe to LGBT Stories for more heart-wrenching and romantic tales. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of their story?